Zelenskyy came crawling back to the White House after Trump met Putin in Alaska on Friday. Now, if you recall, Xi's last trip to D.C. didn't probably go exactly as he planned it. So this time he was flanked by 8 European leaders that are, let's just say, more tolerant, okay, than the sentiment of most Americans right now after we just coughed up $300 billion of our tax dollars to that effort that's losing. And yet here we are. We have very little details of how that money was spent. But the first question Trump was asked, who holds the cards in peace, Russia or Ukraine, and what Trump's outlook was.
I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war.
Yeah, but it's also important to note that Zelensky's tone here, in a suit, I mean, no tie, but in a suit no less, vastly different from the February meeting.
It's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
even
entire
today.
meeting.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife. Thank you very much for invitation.
Someone learned some manners. But Trump also noted at the very end something that makes me somewhat optimistic that Putin actually is interested in a peace deal.
I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today.
But here's another angle that I haven't heard anyone talk about today. It's really important to note why the EU is flanking Zelenskyy today. The EU, in their stupid green energy quest after bending the knee to these green energy eco-terrorists, have essentially made all of Europe externally dependent for all of their energy needs. Wind and solar just ain't cutting it. It never does. The EU gets about 20% of its energy directly from Russia, given various trade restrictions. Some of it is indirectly, not to mention the fact that they get a bunch of uranium from them, too, for their nuclear power plants. But this morning, before this meeting, what did Zelenskyy do? Look at that. He ordered a drone strike on a critical junction of an oil pipeline that will literally cripple Hungary and squeezes the EU, putting urgency on this meeting and a peace agreement. Zelenskyy literally bombed a Russian pipeline supplying the EU this morning. Keep in mind, he's still saying that he's not going to give up land. This is while Russia is also ramping up attacks. So for now, the war is escalating to better posture on each side for terms. But Zelenskyy, though, not negotiating from a place of power. Let's be honest. He has nothing. Frankly, if I was the EU, I would just tell him to pound sand after that little pipeline blow-up antic. But they won't do that because, frankly, they don't have any leverage either. But I think Trump's strongest point here, to Zelenskyy at least, is be like, hey, look, Z, you'll agree to a land swap, or we'll pull out all of our support and you can go it alone without our money and our Patriot missiles, and you'll lose all of your country to Russia. And Trump turns around and should say to Putin, hey, look, Vlad, you're going to take a little bit of land and end this, or America is going to start producing so much oil and supply it to Europe that your economy will have no trading with them at all and it'll wither and die. But as the saying goes, know thy enemy, which is why Trump wanted to meet with Putin with no cameras. And I think we know more about this. Is why we don't know anything about this meeting, because I bet this is what Putin said in there. I actually laid this out back in March, and the pro-Ukrainian people absolutely blew a gasket over the reality of NATO's incursion on Russia. During negotiations on February 9, 1990, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker told Soviet leader Gorbachev that NATO's jurisdiction of forces would not move, quote, 1 inch eastward from their current position if the Soviets accepted German unification in NATO. Now, fast forward to 1994, when Clinton signed off on expanding NATO. And in 1999, Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic officially joined NATO. Fast forward to 2004, where Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, 2 of which share a border with Russia, also adding Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Slovenia to NATO. And Russia, again, was super ticked off about this. And they said, hold up, this is not what we agreed to. NATO didn't care. Then, in April of 2008, at the NATO summit, a bunch of leaders issued a declaration that signaled a, quote, strong support of Ukraine and Georgia to eventually join NATO. 2 more countries that border Russia, as you can see. In the Bucharest summit declaration of 2008, paragraph 23 states, quote, NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership into NATO. We agree today that these countries will become members of NATO. Okay, so Putin's even more angry and went to war in Georgia to stop the NATO membership. People forget this stuff. Then in 2010, we put missile systems, NATO, in Poland and Romania. And the Ukraine president, Yanukovych, was expressly elected on neutrality in Ukraine, which Putin was cool with. But Russia and Ukraine were simultaneously negotiating a 25-year lease in Crimea for a Russian naval base. But then in 2014, while the U.S. tried to overthrow the Ukrainian leaders, which would have potentially put the Russian base there in jeopardy, those negotiations led to Russia taking control of Crimea because they were like, we're not going to deal with this anymore. I bet Putin laid that out for Donald Trump, and Trump was probably like, man, okay. I mean, it's weird how no one talks about that history. There's also the fact that Putin's peace proposal is just a further enforcement of the Minsk agreements, 1 and 2, actually, in 2014 and 2015, that gave autonomy to Russian-speaking and Russian-loyal areas like the Donbass region the region that Putin wants in exchange for peace right now, which is why I think Trump is largely on board with this. Keep in mind, this new land proposal of Putin, it's his buffer, because NATO, by default America, have been creeping closer, like I just said, to Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union, even after they promised to not do that. Most recently, in January of 2022, Anthony Blinken said to Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov that the U.S. reserves the right to put missiles in Ukraine. That's what this is about. Remember, it was 1 month after that Russia invaded Ukraine. I mean, who could have possibly seen that coming, right? Look, I don't share any love for Putin, but his concerns of NATO eastward expansion are not unfounded. Keep in mind, these are similar terms that not only were pretty much agreed to in the Minsk agreements under Obama, but also during the first 7 days of the Russia-Ukraine war, when there were peace talks that Zelenskyy walked away from because he wanted NATO membership. So now we're an estimated 1.4 million lives lost in the exact same spot Putin was in on week 1. This is why Zelenskyy banned elections for his country at the time. Yes, he, despite the left saying, oh, we did a stand with Ukraine for democracy, blah, blah, blah. The guy literally banned elections in his country, which has allowed him to continue this war because most of the money that is going there is not going to the war effort. He needed this war. America is funding the Ukrainian government pensions, their payroll for their civil servants, social benefits, and even teachers, according to the Kiev Independent. So I hope there can be an agreement, but before you rush to say what should or should not be given up by either side, think about it. Think about it objectively with all those facts, the ones that Trump now seems to have.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weekday on Newsmax.